Welcome. Hello, and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace, FMEP. I'm Hilary Rantisi, a 2025 Fellow at FMEP. Today is April the 1st, 2025, and I am delighted to be here with Gina Romero, the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. Today, we'll be discussing latest developments on US campuses and safeguarding the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association in the context of international solidarity with Palestinian people. So, welcome, Gina. And before we jump into conversation, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to Gina and also say that this is a very shortened introduction. There will be a longer bio of hers attached to this podcast so that you can get to know her more. Gina Romero is a national of Colombia and started her mandate as UN Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association in May 2024. Her work has been in the areas of promotion and defense of human rights, governance, civic space, and civic and political participation, with a special focus on marginalized groups, gender, and youth. She's been involved in leadership in many Latin American and Caribbean organizations, such as Red Lad, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and has been an advocate to increase and improve citizen participation and engagement in intergovernmental organizations, such as the Organization of American States. So, welcome.
Well, thank you, Hilary. Thanks for the invitation. And then I am really grateful for being here and just talking today to you.
Wonderful. I mean, I heard you on a visit to Harvard, and that conversation was very interesting, and I thought it was important to share with a broader audience. I wanted to maybe hear from you first, how you came to be doing the work that you're doing, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what specifically is the work of the rapporteur for the UN on what is your mandate for this position?
For sure. Just first of all, just to let you know, and the people who are listening to us today, that I have been a human rights and democracy advocate all my professional life, even when I was a young student, and then I was also participating in some academic actions of leadership and promoting rights, also in the context of university. So I've been always an advocate and an activist. And then in my professional life, I've been mostly involved in working with civil society, mostly civil society here in Colombia, where I'm based and where I'm from, and then also civil society in Latin America, because I led for 10 years an umbrella organization, a network of civil society organizations in Latin America. So at the end, I am always being close to what I call the collective action, which is the possibility for individuals to come together and set some objectives and do activities related to those objectives. I've been also, in relation to the work that I've done in the past, I've been close to several mandate holders of the Special Procedure Branch, which is part of the bigger Human Rights Council and all the portion of the UN that deals with human rights and promote and protect human rights around the globe. And then one of the special rapporteurs I've always been close to is the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly and of Association. I'm the third one, the first woman and the first Latin American. And then when it was when the position for the mandate was open, which is an open public process for selection, I applied because I knew that this is something that is in the heart of my interest, but also is in the heart of my experience. And then what do we do? So the Special procedure, it's a branch that is located and articulated with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, but we are independent experts. So we don't get paid by the UN, we don't have an UN contract or anything, but we are part of the different actors that are involved in the UN actions for the promotion and protection of human rights. And special rapporteurs mainly do three things. They collect information on the information of the rights that they are mandated to report. We create reports actually and other types of communications with governments just to communicate the specific trends in one country or the general trends in regions or in the globe. And also we do visits to collect information, and we voiced up when human rights violations are found. I am the Special Rapporteur for freedom of assembly and of association. This means that I have two rights in my mandate. The freedom of association right is related with the possibility of individuals to come together and form an association that can be formal or informal. It can be registered or not, so it could be an informal association, and then just to create their own objectives, to set their own activities, to actually seek, receive, and use funding, and then to decide and give themselves their own governmental bodies. And then that includes civil society, includes social movements, includes students groups, includes even unions and other type of associations. And then on the other side, the right of freedom of assembly, it's the right also that is an expressive right that is an individual right that is expressed and exercised collectively, that includes the possibility for people to come together and talk and express and coordinate actions and include any type of reunions. So this reunion that we are having here is also an assembly, but also includes protest or any other type of mobilization, public or private, online or offline, regardless which format it takes. So also includes encampments, and other activities that the students have been doing in the past years in universities. So this is pretty much about me and the mandate.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. And I think this is a context for starting to discuss a little bit about the report that you also shared with us. And clearly since you started your mandate, May 2024 was when many of these encampments were taking place. I think, some of your work, I mean, in this report that I'll just very briefly mention that the report was published in October 2024, and we will also share it with the when this podcast is shared, so for people can also access it and read it. The report itself looks at worldwide demonstrations, protesting what's happening in Palestine, and you look at more than 170 encampments in mostly in university settings and across 35 countries worldwide. So there is, I thought it was very interesting that you had access and were able to cover so many countries. I'm wondering if you could share with us some of your findings in this report.
Yes, sure. Just first to let you know that this is not an official report as a special rapporteur, because official reports take a lot of time. And then if I would have done an official report, I would be presenting it only now. So it is just like, it was too long. So I decided to do an official report, which is the sets of recommendations for universities. Okay. And then also very important to see that I did like 3 layers of observation. So first one was the observation of what was happening in general in the globe in the context of the pro-Palestine movement that were doing protest or any other type of assemblies. So this included also street protest and any other activism. So this was the bigger layer. Then I did an observation of what was happening in general in universities. Because then when I took the mandate in May the 1st, I was flooded. The mandate was floated with allegations of human rights violations in the context of general protests about the pro-Palestine protest, and also in the universities. So I actually put a zoom on the universities, and I collected information from many universities in many different countries. And then I did another zoom of very specific universities in which students wanted me to reach out and collect information. So it is like it went from the bigger picture to the smaller. And then I did collected information during many meetings with at least 150 participants from different sectors. And then you are right, from around 30 countries. And then if we see generally the findings that I could provide today as summary, because you see that the recommendation list is very long. There is a big part of understanding what was happening in universities, and then some of the initial findings include that the movement and the encampments and other type of assemblies were very robust, very diverse, very creative, and mostly peaceful, which is something that is very important, because at the end, the restrictions of that you can apply as an institution or as a body to restrict the freedom of assembly needs to be always related to if the assembly is peaceful or not. And then most of these assemblies were peaceful, which is something very important. And also something important to mention is that those assemblies were related with what was happening in a broader spectrum. It was not something that students one day decided to do and then copying themselves, but it was in the midst of this conversation, public conversation and discussion about the actual genocide that we are seeing that is happening in Gaza. Other thing that it is important to mention is that although there were very different settings in different universities and in different countries, most of these groups that sometimes didn't even talk among themselves, they didn't coordinate, they end up with managing the same messages, which actually constitute this like a broader movement. And this is why in all the documents that I've been providing, I talk about the movement, the pro-Palestine movement that is university-based, which is very important. So that is one major part. The other part is that mostly the movement faced systematic and concerted violent attacks that were physical, threats and intimidations, moral and reputational attacks, administrative sanctions and persecution, criminalization, and also symbolic attacks online and offline. It included unlawful surveillance, smear campaigns, doxing, you name it, like many different types of repression. And then these attacks were came from many different actors, from college leaders, from other students, from staff, faculty members, from the administration, and from outsiders. So it was a movement that was constantly attacked from many different ways, many different actors. And then one important issue related to these attacks and discrimination, but then also stigmatization and criminalization, is that the protesters have been vilified and criminalized for using Palestinian symbols, and also even for calling for peace, which is something that is very difficult to understand. I need to clarify that when I was drafting these recommendations, I tried to bring information from students, faculty members, or even students' associations that were actually promoting and addressing the pro-Israel views, but that I had nothing, no one single response of my mails, not one allegation was sent to me. So that was difficult for me. And also regarding how the protesters were addressed, especially in universities, there is double standards, which were very clear in most of the cases I studied. So, which is a clear violation of the principle of content neutrality and non-discrimination. So most of the pro-Israel assemblies and activities were left untouched, while the pro-Palestine activities were heavily repressed. And then campus regulations were frequently an arbitrary change without access to transparency, without any information or clear information. And still now, April 2025, there are many groups of students and university faculty members that don't know which are the rules that are actually applying in the university, which is something very, very, very difficult then for students to actually know what they have to do to comply with the rules that are not clear and that are actually being changed
all the time. Yeah.
all the time. And then also some universities, each university managed very differently the things that were happening in the universities, while some of them created like dialogue spaces and even actually concede some of the requests from the students. Other universities called the police and actually got the assemblies and the encampments violently dispersed by the police, and people got arrested, which are like the two opposites of positions. And then one thing that it is common on all of the cases I studied is that the increases of surveillance and the very little clarity on how is the data collected being used, which is something that is also worrying a worrying trend, and it also relates to the data protection of the students. And also there is something very important to mention, that is that both law enforcers were they call, or even the university police or the university administrative actors actually did similar responses to very different type of protests. So massive protests or marches, for example, were addressed the same way as small sit-ins or silent vigils, which is something that completely contradicts the way of the individualization of each action and then addressing its action if its individuality. So that is something that I found. I have like many more, and then you can see them in the recommendation, but mostly I want to add the last one is that mostly the retaliations of people who were protesting were even higher, including the disciplinary mentions and other, in relation with the more vulnerable students, which include international students, include Muslims, Arab, and Afro-descendant, and even Latino students, especially in the US. So this is something that is, it was very, very, very problematic, because then there is a completely disproportionate impact on this type of actors.
Yeah, no, I mean, so much of what you've shared is so interesting, and many of us have seen it, whether we're on campuses or have followed what has been happening, specifically for looking back at last spring. I mean, it's almost a year since many of these encampments were in place, and it was interesting when you said that these different groups didn't necessarily communicate with each other, but they were very similar in terms of their actions and their messaging and so on. And maybe we can, maybe social media is part of that, but also are they taking messaging from Palestine, from inspiring each other, I guess, also, and encouraging each other without connecting directly. Meanwhile, our sense is at the university level, at the administration level, that there was communication among all these different universities in terms of how they are going to approach the students, what methods they're going to do to maybe suppress their movement, to shut down the encampments, to control the encampments. And so, that is also very interesting. And you allude to sort of the the generational divide as well of where students were at, and then where maybe older students even you mentioned, and the administrations of these universities and how they communicated and treated these students, where now I feel like we're at a very different time almost, even though this is very much, we're still in the same stage in terms of people are trying to raise awareness and to protest what's happening and the genocide, and trying to stop the genocide in Gaza. But the repression on campuses has been so strong that we don't see encampments, at least not in the US. There was, I think, one attempt for an encampment inside a university recently, but overall, looking at the trends, they have changed, and there's been a chilling effect. And
Exactly.
also, this is something that you reference and talk about. And I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about the most recent violations and what even just happened, I guess, just a week ago in my neighborhood, where one of the Turkish students at Tufts University was abducted and by ICE, and this trend of international students and some even naturalized students who are now so vulnerable. We have started with Mahmoud Khalil, Ranjani, Srinivasan, Badar Khansuri. There's quite a few students, and of course, Rasmia, Rumaisa Osterk, who was taken here from Tufts University. There is definitely a chilling effect of that, and students who are very frightened, students who have green cards and should feel much safer. But the reality on campus is quite frightening for a lot of the students. And as you just mentioned, your last point about students of color being the target of much of the attacks. So I'm just wondering if you could help us sort of maybe give us a broader perspective of what is happening, not just in the US, but in other countries as well.
Yes, just before that, I really want to touch a little bit a point, Hilary, that you were mentioning about the connections, the interconnection of the different actors. Because although I cannot prove that that there were like a coordinating activity between universities, I did receive a lot of information on how universities were actually coordinated with the police, and then especially in the US, I received several allegations in which actually the police was sending information to the university regarding protests that were happening off campus, and then just to try to make like internal cases for doing persecution to students, which is something very disturbing. And then on the other side, there have been several very interesting researchers, especially in the UK, in which they have proved that some like lobby groups related to surveillance have been actually like coordinating actions from in the US and in the UK to actually increase surveillance in campus. So there is a lot of things, a lot of information, Hilary, that we don't know yet, that probably will emerge in some months or in years, I don't know. But then there is a lot of information there that some things that had happened in the ground. So for example, all those doxing actions that the students were facing everywhere, because that is in the US, in the UK, in France, you name it, everywhere, which were actually the actors who were actually doing this doxing, and which is the relation between these actors, internal actors in the universities, and actually the universities leadership also. So there are like there's a lot of information that we don't know yet, and then we need to just to start collecting that information also about the what is happening now. It's so sad for me. I just went to the US. I spent there a couple of weeks, like 2 weeks, some weeks ago. And then I visited 3 different universities. And then it's so sad to see that although the claims are still there, because there is still an ongoing genocide in Gaza, and then because the universities have not actually taken the lead on what most of the protesters were requesting, including divestment, there is no protest anymore in the campus. And that shows you how effective were the measures taken in the past to actually curtail the right. People don't go to protest because they are afraid. They are afraid of being expelled. They are afraid of losing their jobs. They are afraid to be just sent up or receive some violence from the police. And there is a lot of trauma and emotional distress now. I've heard information, especially in the US, a couple in the UK of students that actually had suicides and attempts because they are like so worried about their futures, and then also all this trauma that is there, it needs to be addressed, and it is a response, a direct response, a consequence of the curtailing of the right of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and even association in universities. And this is terrible because what it shows is that there is a hostile environment for the exercise of freedom of peaceful assembly and other rights in universities. And then the problem is that this affects other rights. It's not only peaceful assembly. It's not only freedom of expression. It's also freedom of association. It's academic freedom. It's the right of identity. It's labor rights. It's the right of education. You name it. This is a long list. So this is very problematic. And it was actually saying in the talk that you hear in Harvard is that we may be losing universities in general as a space for contest the power struggles and as a space to actually create new places for new agreements, for actually create dialogue among ideas, and actually to fight against authoritarianism, which is extremely important in a world in which authoritarianism it's actually a trend in an increased trend. And
Yeah,
then,
I mean that. Sorry, go. No, I mean this is very much connects to everything that is happening now, even just yesterday with Harvard, but also Columbia last week, just watching all these elite universities that are capitulating, and also there's an erosion of this the right to not just freedom of expression, but education itself is a threat. So it's a very frightening moment for anyone who is in those spaces, and especially I think for students, but also for educators, and lots of faculty are extremely concerned. I think some of what you shared with us from the report were some of your recommendations, and I'm wondering if maybe you could share some of those that remind us also of what these academic institutions are supposed to be and what they're supposed to provide, and what has eroded in the last year and a half in terms of rights of students. And so, yeah, and I think it was very important for us in that space to hear from you as a reminder, like it's our responsibility as educators to protect students, to give them the space. And anyway, I will maybe you could share with us some of your recommendations.
Yeah, but before that, I want to touch a little bit on the political pressure that the universities are receiving. So in the time in which I was drafting the recommendations for university, I actually listened and saw all the calls and hearings that the Congress were doing, in which some of these elite universities leaderships were called, and those were very nasty. And then we started seeing there some of this pressure on universities, which is actually not only curtailing the possibility of universities to actually decide for themselves, but also are actually creating some of these these trends of curtailing the rights, which is something very, very problematic. And then right now it is the executive branch, it is the government itself, which is actually exerting even harder pressure, just removing fundings allocated, and even actually doing like several other threats on universities, which is completely against also the freedom, the academic freedom, and other rights that the universities themselves as institutions have. And then the most important and the most disturbing thing is that the abduction of students or members, and the threats of deportation. Because at the end, again, this is actually having a greater impact in the more vulnerable actors, the actors that actually have a lot to lose, because they are actually in a place that is not their own. They are actually doing a work and giving so much to in this case the US, that they are actually putting in completely risk their well-beings, but also their safety. Some of these people are coming from places in which they cannot go back, because then at the end they actually will face violence and threats there where they will first started. So this is something that is very disturbing. And also I keep saying that messing up with students and messing up with young people can alter gravely the possibility of sustaining the future human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is actually something that we are happening. All this silence that we are seeing in universities now, it's also seeing a generation that is kept quiet because they are afraid of talking and speaking up, which is terrible. Around the recommendations, Hilary, there are also a long list of recommendations, but mostly some of them were like actually respect the university, the students and professors a right to assemble and to the right of expression, but also recognize their engagement and recognize how important it is for university to be those places of advancing ideas and to contest ideas and contest the power when it is needed. And also one huge recommendation was to cease the stigmatization and hostilities, and also to actually cease any of the disciplinary actions against students and that were adopted unduly. Because some of these, I didn't mention this because it's just too long, but then some of these allegations that were brought against the students are allegations that are actually completely against the human rights standards. And this is something that universities needs to actually understand, that their laws and regulations cannot be like anything that they made up one day that they needed to change the rules because something was happening in campus. All those regulations need to align and to be aligned to the human rights standards, and this is something that they have not doing. Also, that is important too for me, and this is something that I've been promoting while talking to universities, to do very deep researchers of what is happening with these doxing attacks and other attacks to students, because I have seen also that most of the students that have even a slightly idea that is contested and did something that could be seen as violent, which is something that we can discuss also, because the standards are very clear on which constitutes violence and which is actually not violence in the context of a peaceful protest. All these students have had several even court cases and administrative and disciplinary actions, but the students or other actors who actually were exercising all sorts of violence against the pro-Palestine movement have received nothing, not even a letter. And this is something, this double standard is very problematic, and this needs to be stopped right now. Also, universities need to prioritize negotiation and mediation, and trying to create and foster again the space of talking to contested ideas, but without curtailing actually the rights and responding to all the standards also for the promotion and the protection of the freedom of expression. And also, again, especially for those universities who changed their regulations on their go, and which actually didn't communicate clearly those regulations, universities need to to actually go back to regulations, do a wide review of those regulations to not only update them and make them align to the international standards, but also to create a wider debate about which should be the regulations for students in a more participative way, which is something that is not. And then regarding all those topics about surveillance, well, reframe and cease any surveillance, be very mindful of which is the use of the data that they are collecting, and then also understand that the peaceful assembly should always be facilitated without the use of force. So calling the police when there is an actual reason for doing that, and also even sending the university police to disperse or dismantle some of the assemblies on encampments. It could be very unlawful if they don't actually go in the lines of the recommendations and the standards that are there in the international community. And then yes, just to try to create and just to stop and change this hostile environment and create an environment in which students can feel safe to express themselves, in which they can feel safe to exercise their rights, but also in which they can be safe to actually be. Because what we are having now is that even students that are in the threat of deportation cannot even be and exercise their own action and their own life in something that in a space that should be a protective space, which is a university and any other educational institution, and not a threat for their own well-being and freedom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm wondering if there are examples from other countries other than the US that where you have seen maybe the universities reversing some actions or doing things to provide space for students and make them feel safe and remind them that this is their space, that they have these rights. I think what you were saying about creating regulations, and yes, we are seeing more and more regulations rather than creating more clarity about the rights of students to assemble, to create, to learn. We're seeing that space becoming smaller and smaller, much more contained. And I think, is this a worldwide trend? Or is the US leading in this? Obviously, this isn't the first time this has happened in global movements, but at this moment in history, I think, are there lessons or are there other examples we could be looking at?
Yeah, well, regarding the political pressure that the universities are receiving, the US case is very it's the worst that we have now. Regarding cases of universities changing their minds and actually revoking some of their measures against students, I think that this had happened in many universities with very specific cases, but the trend of persecution and harassment is still there. Regarding the cases of universities that have tried actually to come up with strategies to try to listen better to the students and just to create these scenarios of dialogue. I really like the cross-faculty groups that were created in Sweden universities, which actually are informal network, but then in which teachers actually and staff, and then also allowed by the universities, were created informal networks to create events, to actually listen to students, to help the students also with the emotional distress, which is something that I am really worried now. I mean, I've heard so many sad stories and very problematic stories about students that are now having constant panic attacks and other like very grave repercussions in their health and their mental health. That then at the end, these groups at the end wants to create and create like an environment in which students actually can talk freely and can feel at least covered by somebody who understands and who cares. This is something that is it's very interesting, and actually in the Swedish, some of the Swedish universities are trying to formalize these groups and create like research actionable network to continue working on these issues in the longer term, now not only with the pro-Palestine movement but others. So there are several things that but very isolated. I don't see that universities are actually taking care on creating spaces for at least protected students, which is the least that they can do. And then perhaps if somebody who's listening this podcast knows of other good practices, please reach out, because I really would like to hear and collect them, and then even present them as good practices to other universities that at some point will look for some changes in their approaches, hopefully. But mostly that.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I would like to read just a little bit of the report that addresses the importance of this moment, and why I thought this articulated very well why the universities are spaces that need to be protected. So it talks about a profound threat to democratic systems and institutions, especially when young people are affected. It risks alienating an entire generation, which also you mentioned, damaging their participation and perception of their role in democratic processes. Universities must recognize that their responsibility extends beyond campus borders. Their actions have the potential to shape political discourse, culture, civic education, and ultimately the future sustainability of democracy, freedoms, and human rights. I feel like this moment, especially in the US, these are the conversations that we need to be having about the future. If this entire generation is being suppressed and cannot have practice this freedom of expression and receive an education and space for discussion and civic discourse and education, what does the future look like? So it's a very critical moment for all of us in these spaces, and it doesn't just impact people who are students or who are on university campuses, but all of society and the future.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think I feel like every day is like a year almost in some ways,
It's exhausting, right?
So much is happening from one day to the next, and we are receiving news. We're almost on the receiving end, and there is this sense of fear that is taking control of people, that they don't feel that they have agency when, people do have agency. They need to come together and to have a voice. But I think the reminder that we are also connected with other groups, whether directly or indirectly, that these voices are not necessarily just solo voices, and that we do have a responsibility to elevate, to give space for these voices and to help protect people in whatever capacity we have. I don't know if you have any parting advice for us of where to go, but I feel like this is an ongoing conversation in a way.
Yes, no doubt. I think that for now we
Yeah.
right now we are in a moment in which we actually need to protect the more vulnerable students, and this is something that is not only a task of the university leadership itself, but also all the professors that are listening to this and then want to help, perhaps reaching out to some of the students that have been targeted by attacks and dogs. This is people that need from a hug to actually an actual mental health council, and also just to trying to create these spaces in which students are being free of expressing their grief, their sadness, their rage, because then at the end, this is what it is to live in democracy. It's also to see what is happening around, and then just to be able to actually express that, and then collectively decide what to do about that. And then this is why I keep saying that universities need to become again, because we lost them, that beacon of learning for sure, but also of creating a space for the social change that sometimes we need. And in the specific case of the elite universities, the message is very clear. It is that if elite university don't resist the political pressure, then this pressure is going to destroy the smaller and weaker institutions, not only universities, but other type of institutions. So this is why I kept saying, and when I was in Harvard, that the universities such as Harvard, with the power that it had, which is a power which is not only economic, it's also reputational, it's also political. You need to use the power to resist. Otherwise, this is going to be even harder in the future. And I don't want to see that.
Yes, it's so frightening, because I feel like these institutions, elite institutions, have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to the rest of the institutions. And once they are not upholding these rights, then it's a very frightening moment. And I think
it is indeed.
We are at this this precipice right now. We have seen messages yesterday from Harvard to the Trump administration that and it's a frightening moment for, I think,
it is,
everyone in the education space. So I want to thank you for starting us in this conversation, for giving us examples and giving us language also to be thinking about how we can be supportive of our students and how we can create these spaces that are essential for not only this generation, but for democracy and for our future. So to be continued, and very much thankful for everything that you do.
No, thanks for the invitation. And then I'm here also to keep collecting information and just trying to make sense of everything that is happening, but also to push universities and other institutions to comply with the human rights responsibilities that they have, because this is not a favor. They are responsible for protecting and promoting human rights. So thank you, Hilary, and thanks for the people who was with us this minute.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gina, for joining me today. And I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Please make sure to check out the FMEP website, www.fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast and lots of other rich content related to Palestine and Israel. And please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast to stay up to date. And you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify. You can also watch video versions of our podcasts, including this one on YouTube. And with that, I'm Hilary Rantisi, signing off until the next episode of FMEP's Occupied Thoughts. Thank you, everyone.
Ciao.